Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about capstone and dissertation milestones. Now, this is a webinar that was requested by students from multiple programs. So to make sure that we are shaping the content for the people who are in attendance, if you could please let me know what your current program is in the chat, and also let us know where you are in the process. For example, you could be just starting, you could be in the middle of coursework, almost done with coursework, writing your capstone dissertation or project, almost ready to defend, anything like that. That will help us know, because there's a lot that we could talk about in this next half hour, but it's always most useful if we talk about the questions that you have about the process. So we're going to mostly be looking at three programs in turn. First, we're going to talk about capstone milestones for the MFTO program. Then we'll talk about the leadership or EDD doctoral program dissertation milestones. And finally, the same thing with the nursing doctoral project. And one of the things we want to do in this is to help bridge an understanding of the terminology that these different programs use, because there's a lot of stuff that can be, shall we say, institution specific, where certain names are used for something. And for most people, there's an imprint, their vocabulary, the way that they describe these tends to be from the institution that they attended last and shaped by their advisor. So there are some institutions that use prospectus and proposal interchangeably, and others that's a distinct set of here's a different document for the prospectus before you get to the proposal, and we're going to try and demystify some of that. And I see we have a mix of different programs here, so great, thank you for sharing those details. If you just joined us, please let us know what program you're in and where you are in the process. So let's talk about the MFTO program first. So this is our marriage and family therapy program, master's level. And here we have a key resource that does outline the different aspects of the capstone. This is the online MFT student handbook. You want to make sure you have version 19, which is the most current, and the prudent section is pages 18 to 22. And if we look at this, we find that it actually lays out some of the major capstone timeline blocks where you'll be working on particular theories and other ideas and frameworks of interest in different assignments. And so if you are earlier in the process, if you're, say, just starting this and you know, oh, I've got to do this capstone, this is also a guide for things that you should be saving notes on so that you don't have to go back and reread everything, but you can refer to, oh, here's what I wrote about this, here's how I summarized it. And so I do recommend that students who are taking the MFTO Masters that you save a folder specifically for things that you know will be related to the capstone. So if we were to look at this timeline here, we see that there are some key ideas like integrative behavioral couples therapy. I would be very surprised if you did not discuss that with some depth in your capstone, just because of how interwoven it is into the approach. And we also have this built-in scaffolding structure where certain courses have assignments that are directly designed to help you start writing parts of what will be the final paper, the final capstone. Now, if we're looking at this, we see that a lot of these are tied to internships. And this is something that sometimes catches students by surprise, because you go to an internship site, you're engaged in this work that you're passionate about, and then week 5, wait a minute, I've got a theory of change thing coming up here. What was that? And so knowing where this will come into play is very helpful. So keeping that perspective on how these are going to coalesce into eventually, when you hit MFTO 607, the final internship, that you'll be presenting this material integrated finally into a larger paper that you've worked on segments of, and things that are designed to feed into your writing it since really the first year. Now, if we look at this, we see that there is a detailed description and and I've got an excerpt from the page on the right-hand side. But basically, we're looking at two different projects here. So there's the theory of change paper, which will be roughly 15 to 20 pages. And we also have a clinical case study presentation. Now, I don't know about your academic background. For many of our students, 15 to 20 pages seems like a lot because it's longer than any assignment that they've done before, often by a factor of 2 or more. But if we look at it, we actually get a detailed guide for what's supposed to go in here and in what order. An introduction, a related literature review, a discussion of theoretical considerations, one of those ACU particular things because of how our program integrates faith and respect it for the clients and the people being counseled, philosophical, theological, and spiritual considerations. The integrated theory of change, which, as you may recall, is something that is brought up multiple times in this approach. How to apply this in therapy, that's usually the larger part. And the conclusion. Put another way, if we're looking at the paragraph model that we've also been teaching here at ACU, the application in therapy is writ large the synthesis section. This is where it all comes together and says, okay, given all that stuff, what should you be doing in whatever the particular focus that you're doing in the capstone? Now, the clinical case study presentation, again, depending on your prior experience, 30 minutes could seem like an awfully long time. But if we look at it, the instructions give us a very detailed outline of what to discuss in what order. And once you look at all these things, that's 10 different steps. Then with 30 minutes for the presentation, a couple minutes for each slide, you actually get that 30 minutes pretty quickly. So once you actually start writing, and especially if you have your notes handy from those previous courses that we mentioned, actually a lot of students end up with the opposite place from where they expect it to end, where they're having to cut material to stay within 30 minutes, because actually there's a lot of stuff to cover here. And it's important to keep in mind that not all of the details that you know about these will be relevant or have to be said in full detail here. So if you start with doing exactly the things listed on the slides, you'll be in a much better place to decide how much extra detail to go in based on after you do your first run through where you end up. And a lot of students who do just the 10 thing will end up somewhere around 25 to 30 minutes anyway. And so they think that they're going to have to expand it, but they don't. So again, the slide will usually be 2 to 3 minutes per slide. Now, we're going to turn to the leadership doctorate, the Educational Leadership EDD program, and we'll talk about how this has actually a very similar structure. Now, some of these things are organized a little differently, and some of the terminology is different, but the basic idea is the same. You have assignments that are feeding into a final written product that you will present in different stages. In this case, the presentations will be your proposal and dissertation defense. And again, we have a document that lays out the rules and expectations, so to speak, the EDD dissertation content guide. Now, to keep this a manageable length, we also have the dissertation template, which is filled with more instructions and examples, but the content guide is focused more on, okay, here's what you're supposed to write. And then the template has more about the, okay, here's exactly how to organize it and how it should look. To get an idea of what people have written, how it's organized, how it's supposed to look, I do recommend that you take a look at the ACU Digital Commons, where you can look at approved dissertations, exactly how they were submitted, and see how to align your work with that, which I find browsing that answers a lot of people's questions, because you can see, okay, that's what they mean by that. You can also look at things outside ACU as well to go to the ProQuest Theses and Dissertations database and see what people from other institutions have written. Just keep in mind that they may be using a different style system, or they may be following some slightly different institutional requirements. Now, the key milestones. Now, you're going to get my gloss on this because there are a number of very detailed lists that tend to make it harder to see the big picture. So this is my perspective as someone who's worked with several hundred students in the program and to get them through from first course to completion. First, we have the problem statement. Why do I mention this as a key milestone? Because this is when you start really narrowing down what you're going to be writing about. There are other assignments that talk about your interests, but when you write the first draft of what becomes your problem statement, now we're learning about the general problem that you're interested in and getting some idea of the specific problem that you'll be addressing. Next comes the purpose statement. Again, there are multiple assignments that take you towards this, but the purpose statement says, okay, here's what I'm trying to do. If the problem statement has, here's what you're trying to solve, well, there's some practical aspect of what you're actually trying to do. So if we make a car analogy, if the problem is your car has lots of red lights on the dashboard and you're scared to drive it, there are many different ways to solve this problem. You could sell the car, you could get it fixed, you could get fixed just enough to turn those lights off, and those are going to be very different approaches. So the purpose says, okay, here's what my dissertation project or dissertation study is designed to achieve. What's it supposed to enable on the other side? And then from that, you develop at least the preliminary research questions that you're trying to answer. So again, car maintenance analogy, what are you actually trying to find out when you take the car to the mechanic? Your question could be, when am I going to get it back? It could be, how much is it going to cost? How do I stop this from happening again? What do you mean when I lent my car out to insert person here? They damaged whatever it is, ABS, tire, suspension. And so the question or questions is going to, again, very much narrow down the scope of what you're doing and enable you to write the chapter 1 draft. Without the problem statement, you can't do a good purpose statement. Without a problem statement and purpose statement, you can't do the research questions because we don't know the parameters of why you're trying to answer certain things. And once you have those first 3, then you can write the whole chapter. The other things like the background, the definition of key terms, and even the theoretical framework, those follow pretty logically once you have the first 3. Chapter 2 is your literature review. That is often the longest for people to write, just because if you don't set clear parameters for what you have to do, then you can keep writing and researching forever. And chapter 3 is usually the fastest because once you've seen what's been done before, you get an idea of what is likely to produce the results or insights that you're looking for. So chapter 1 is your introduction, chapter 2 is your literature review, chapter 3 is your methods chapter where you lay out, okay, here's what I'm going to do. If you have research participants, who are you going to recruit? What are you going to do with them? Are you going to be using for example, a survey that was developed by someone else? Are you going to be creating your own questions? How will you know those questions work? If you're involving human subjects, you'll need to data involving human subjects, you'll need to most likely submit an application to the Institutional Review Board, the IRB. That's not a terribly daunting process. It's just something where you want to make sure you have everything in order and are giving them all the information they're asking for, or they'll come back to you and say, hey, we need this other information. Now, where the IRB approval is with chapters 1 to 3, the reason I have them in this order is that once you have a draft of chapter 3, you know the kinds of things that you're looking for, that you need the IRB to sign off on. Or to put it another way, if you don't settle the details of how you're doing your project first, you may have to come back to the IRB again. but you want to be thinking about it. And once chapter 3 is largely set in terms of content, then it's a good time to go to the IRB. Then you have your proposal with its defense. The defense, you basically submit it and they look at it as a whole. Now, there will almost always be some significant changes that go in there where people will ask for additions, make suggestions on making it clearer, and understanding that changes will happen makes the whole process a lot easier. It's not a fault that changes have been made. For example, after my own doctoral proposal defense, one of my committee members said, "Oh, yes, I think you should talk about these sources here." And they all happen to be sources that she had studied in graduate school and cited in her own dissertation. And often committees will make their mark on your research that way. And that's not a bad thing. In my case, it's okay, I need to spend an extra 2 days adding more stuff there, and then it's fine. Move on to the next part, which is the research. When you're doing the things that you described doing in chapter 3, and once you have collected your data, then you do your analysis. You write up chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4 is reporting the results, including the results of the analysis. Chapter 5 is the discussion of what this means. After that, and something that sometimes takes people by surprise, is that you do need to update chapters 1 to 3, because often there are some changes in the lived experience, a lived reality of doing the research, and you want to make sure that it's accurate. And also things that you said you will do, you need to update to say that you did those, or didn't do them, as the case may be, because you're going to be submitting a document that looks retrospectively at all of what you did. Now, once you have updated chapters 1 to 3, comes the dissertation defense. And again, as before, the dissertation defense is followed by edits or updates. And again, there are almost always some changes. In my case, the committee requested some changes. It happened that one of my committee members suggested or requested some changes that all had to do with chapter 1. And it stopped at, I think, page 15. And that's probably as much as they read, and that's fine. I made the changes, and then I submitted, and then it was done. Now, at ACU, we have a stage that is a duplicate of something that I did in person and at my doctoral institution. So I went to Boston University. And at the time, there was a dissertation editor whose name was Martha Kahn. And you would bring in a printout of your dissertation, put it on her desk. She would look through it. She would get out her ruler, check the margins and things like that, and then tell you what tweaks you might have to do to make it look all the ways it should. Now, we have a similar but digital process where you get your committee to sign off on your post-defense edits, and then you submit to the editorial review process. And a couple things happen there. The most important of which is that collectively, you working in collaboration with an external editor, work to make sure that your dissertation that is being published looks all the ways an ACU dissertation should. Usually there's a pretty straightforward process there. Sometimes when there's missing content, and mistakes happen, I've had someone accidentally delete a couple pages from the references. They said because their toddler was playing with the computer. It happens, but the important thing was we caught that and they went and found an old version of the file, put those missing pages back in, and then it was approved and published. And sometimes we find things where, figures have been mislabeled or something like that. The end goal is to have your published dissertation look like a nice polished manuscript and that it represent you well as a professional credential. And then the final step is publication, where it ends up published in the ETD database. Now hold on just one moment before we move into the DNP program. All right, so next on our list is the Doctor of Nursing Practice project. And this is a degree program that, if the EDD has very strongly integrated components, the DMP project is very direct because the process is in many ways very straightforward for what gets you to the uh, project write-ups and research stage. And we know that there are some tasks that will come up very predictably around the same time. Here again, we have a guiding book, the Doctor of Nursing Practice Program Guidelines Handbook. Make sure you've got the student one. And it includes a detailed planning timeline here, where you can, at the start of your program, look and see, okay, here's when I'm going to be taking these courses. When approximately should I be working on these? And there are many assignments that are very directly crafted to help you meet these requirements around these times. Now, does that mean that the thing that you submit as your PICO question in Nursing 701 will be exactly what you end up writing at the end? There's usually some change. Is it possible to have a PICO question that you seek to answer that is more or less what you end up answering? Sure. Usually some details will evolve. You might not be working at the same place. There may be more things that are available, or different ideas, or even another piece of research has been published since then that you then use as a model. So there are many ways in which that might evolve. If we look here on the left-hand side, we see that a key thing that they suggest that you be doing at the end of your first course is that you identify a mentor. That's an optional step, but very helpful, because a lot of people benefit from having someone that they can ask questions about shaping their research. And if you have someone involved that early, it's much easier to get the sort of reality check where someone says, okay, you could do that. Here's some reasons why you might not want to. And I would say that ambition in each of these capstone or dissertation or project X that you might do, there's a difference between what you could do and what you have to do, and what you want to do versus what is most practical to do right now. So with the DMP program, you're really starting out with your PICO question that you do in what's usually your first course. And this is where you have a sort of draft of a research question in a particular format. And basically asking what really interests you. If you had to do it right now, what would you be working on? And that usually evolves a lot, and involves in part because of what you learn about theoretical or conceptual frameworks, approaches for making sense of information. And so you might have the same problem in mind, but decide to go about it in a very different way because of things that you encounter in your reading and research. Now, because the DMP as a professional doctorate program with many expected things you need to check off, one of those big questions is it practical to do this in the, can you get permission to do this kind of thing, which is where the clinical site agreement comes in for many students. If you have people saying, even if it's just informally, yes, that sounds like something we'd allow, that helps you conceptualize it and move forward. And so eventually that'll get formalized in a letter of support, and you start working on your drafts of chapters 1 to 3. Again, it's going to be the introduction for chapter 1, the literature review for chapter 2, and for chapter 3, the research methods. Now, after you have drafts of chapter 1 to 3, you have a mid-program review. And an interesting facet of the program is that precedes the project proposal defense. And part of that is looking at what you have and say, okay, does this fit together? Because we want you to succeed. We want your project proposal to say, okay, ready to go forward. Again, there'll probably be some revisions, but we want to prepare you for that defense by having a mid-program review and take a bird's eye look at it. You might make an analogy to if you're going to make a big important presentation, you're probably going to do a practice run first, and the mid-program review can be understood somewhat analogous to that. Once your defense is passed, you need to submit your IRB application. The exact order may vary depending on the clinical site or sites that you might be involving, because some will have okay, well, we need you to have an approved proposal first before we'll grant permission. And some will say, okay, we'll grant you permission, and then you need to send us a copy of your IRB's approval. And so again, the site may determine the order that you are submitting that. And then, of course, your research, followed by, once you have your data, you start analyzing that for Chapter 4, and then explain how or why this matters in Chapter 5 with your conclusions. After that, you need to update Chapters 1 to 3, both to reflect the reality of what you did and to make sure that things that you said you were proposing to do are now described in past tense as things that you actually did. After that comes the project defense. Again, there will almost always be some changes, perhaps some additions, usually relatively minor. And then the revisions are completed. You go on to editorial review and publication. Now, I would say that often students who come out of the project proposal defense will feel very energized and sometimes a little intimidated by the feedback they got, because a lot of that feedback is looking forward to the full project defense, step 12 on this. And if you look at it more incrementally as, okay, here's a list of things to work on, but I don't need to get them usually done like tomorrow, but let me start making a list and crossing these off, then that usually works very well. And you can absolutely work with the Writing Center about that. I have many students who are specifically advised to work with me after their project proposal defense to get those changes implemented so that they have to do minimal updates to Chapter 1 to 3 later. Now, this brings us to the last parts of this presentation, and I'm going to say we have a following half-hour presentation about getting unstuck in the writing process. But I'm going to stop this recording now. You are more than welcome to ask questions and to stay around for the second half, but we're going to conclude this one formally right now.